Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Realm of Unknown. So today is a special type of day. It is currently, I believe at the time of recording this, it is currently the transition into fall time. I was about to say spring, but that would be utterly wrong. But it is now fall, and it is officially the autumn season, and I love it, and I absolutely adore it, especially being up here in the East Coast. And I want to make it more, fun and enjoyable on the podcast, so there is going to be some new stuff that is coming out. I'm doing more stuff with other podcasters, which I'm going to announce real quick soon. And yeah, just a lot of things that I want to start doing. Currently, I am still in the process of full-time job hunting. I currently work 2 part-time freelance positions and do this. And I want to, once I get that, manage my schedule to the point in which I'm able to do some more fun, interesting things for this podcast and for this brand, I guess. This is what essentially it is. Because there's a lot of really fun places around Philadelphia and up here in PA and the surrounding states that really tie into the autumn season and also, like the ghost stuff and the spooky things. And I would want to bring that more into this. Back when I did YouTube for the YouTube channel of the same name, I did I forget when I actually went. I want to say it was in September. I went to Eastern State Penitentiary and I videotaped the whole thing. There's, I think, 2 episodes that are like an hour long each, and it's just me exploring Eastern State for the first time, going on the tours, experiencing the location, and also randomly stumbling upon the fact that they have a flea market outside of the entire prison just all day long. So that was a fun time, and I want to do more stuff like that. I'm not sure how that's going to translate to a more audio-based platform. I would probably say that a lot of that content will be pushed over to the Patreon, which, if you guys are not aware of yet, I have been pushing the Patreon for this a little harder in the past few episodes, and that is Realm of Unknown on Patreon. And if you go there, there's a $1, $3, and $5 tier list that you guys can go and help support the podcast with some special prizes and rewards afterwards for doing so. You can get some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, exclusive mini-series that I am currently working on and have been announcing. You get some future announcements for upcoming episodes and discussions and topics, as well as, in this one in particular, you don't have to be a member in order to participate with. A lot of the posts that I will make are not exclusive to you having to be like in a higher tier and stuff like that. So if you want to go over there to check out maybe like the sources that I'm using for episodes, how I'm getting my topics, where I'm going to find the research, or interesting articles that I might come across that, might not withstand their own episode of the podcast, I put those over on Patreon. So if you want to take part in that community, we have 2 really awesome members right now within the past few weeks. And yes, so I'm trying to push that really hard. But yeah, so aside from that announcement and aside from that sort of direction that I'm trying to be aiming for, I have 2 quick little things. First, I want to, at the time of this coming out, it is not officially out yet, so bear with me. But if you guys are not aware of the really amazing podcast by the name of Dead Time Stories, what did I do for them recently? I sent in a listener stories for them before, and I mentioned them and announced it. If you're following me on Twitter, I constantly retweet their stuff. They're really great. They're another Philadelphia-based paranormal/true crime-based podcast. They're really great. They're awesome topics, fun energy, and just a really creative spin on the overall approach to this sort of format and subject matter, and they keep it very light and very interesting pretty much every episode. So if you have not listened to them and you want to catch up before a special little thing that they run called Guesttoberfest starting in October, You can follow them on pretty much any platform. I listen to them personally on Apple Podcast, and if you listen to them there, definitely give them a review. But you can pretty much find them, I believe, on Spotify. I've seen them also on Podcoin, but that's leaving. I think that's gone. And Stitcher and stuff like that. So if you want to check them out, definitely do so. Again, they are really incredible, and they are Dead Time Stories with a Z, not an S. So it's Dead Time Stories. And yeah, so I will be part of a special little thing for their Guesttoberfest announcement. So stay tuned for that, and be sure to catch up on it in order to actually have context for what this is. So lastly, before we start, we've got a few promos to run, possibly two. Right now it's currently just one, so if there's a second one that runs, it's just because it came about after recording, so bear with me. But if you have been listening to the last week's episode of the podcast, then you are aware that I am running some promotions for the fabulous and, again, similarly themed podcast Twisted Philly, who is another, paranormal / true crime and a little more like history oriented podcast that is, again, focused here in Philadelphia. And she is going to be taking part in a live show here in Philly coming in October. So if you are interested in, the spooky or the strange, or just love listening to podcasts and want something to do and go see, then be sure to listen here for more information.
On Saturday, October 12th, you can catch Twisted Philly Podcast live with acclaimed paranormal podcast Hillbilly Horror Stories at the Philadelphia Ethical Society on Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. The event begins around 6-ish. We'll start with a meet and greet. Jeremy Collins from Podcasts We Listen To will be joining us as MC. Then Jerry and Tracy from Hillbilly Horror Stories will take the stage. They're coming all the way up from Kentucky to visit the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection and meet Twisted Philly listeners. After Jerry and Tracy, I'll share some of my favorite Philadelphia haunted history, tales I haven't shared on the podcast, which will only be available at the live show. Jeremy will host an Ask Us Anything. You can even get on the mic with your own paranormal experiences if you'd like to share. There will be time to shop for merchandise, we'll have giveaways, I'll have some prizes. It's going to be a spooky good time, getting everyone in the mood for Halloween. Tickets are just $20 for 2 live podcast shows on one night. I've got a link for tickets on Twitter and Facebook, and there's also information on Instagram. You won't want to miss this. We're going to have a blast. If you prefer to head home a little early, we'll be wrapping up before 9:30, so it won't be a late night. Or if you're up for spending a little time in the city, you can join me and Jeremy, Jerry and Tracy for a night out after the show. Rittenhouse Square has some of the best bars and restaurants in the city, just blocks from the Ethical Society. We can't wait to see you on the 12th.
Okie doke, so for some backstory for what we're going to be talking about today, who has heard of an amusement park and has gone to one and has realized that despite how fun these are supposed to be, that when you peel the layers away, it is pretty creepy overall. I personally don't go on the rides when I go to amusement parks or theme parks of that sort. I have very crippling fears of heights and high speeds that in which I cannot control. So if I am in a ride per se, like a roller coaster, I can't really have much control over what happens if something terrible happens. So that sort of stuff freaks me out, so I don't really enjoy it. If I'm aware of people, it's not as creepy, but overall, I would agree that the fact that amusement parks have this weird facade to them definitely makes them to, in my personal book, be on the more creepy end of the list, and that also does not stop them from having their own sort of horror stories involved. The one personally at the local, I believe the local ones at my beach location, where my grandparents have a house that we would visit sometimes, I believe some of those have like creepy horror stories of people dying or people being killed on the rides. I don't know how credible those ones are. I haven't looked into them, and I haven't even heard the stories about them since I was like in middle school. But that sort of reputation follows a lot of these parks, and one of those parks is what we're going to be talking about today. And it is an abandoned amusement park located in West Virginia here in the good old US of A. So At the time, its attractions have all become pretty much run down, and the paths have become overgrown, and it is just falling apart. And it actually holds the title of the scariest amusement park in the world. I don't know how true this is, but it has that title. It could ultimately just be one of those things where people just give it that title. But if you guys have some knowledge of the paranormal and haunted locations, and you are like, get to the point, you probably have already figured out the fact that we are talking about the Shawnee Lake Amusement Park. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I believe I am, but if I'm not, cool. So again, the Lake Shawnee location is actually located in Mercer County, West Virginia. It's a very short trip outside of Princeton, and the grounds in which the park stands has a rather complex and pretty bloody history to it. And I'm going to be talking about that first as I give some background to the location and potentially why it might be one of the most haunted locations and definitely one of the creepiest amusement parks out there. So this location has predominantly been used as a burial grounds for the native Shawnee tribe of the location. The archaeologists of today believe that there could be an estimated 3,000 bodies buried on the location. However, again, this is an estimate. I believe they have excavated around a dozen or two, and they're still working on it. Like, you can't really just dig up the whole place. I believe they found like artifacts and stuff to assume that this amount of bodies have been there. And this sort of relation to death, so to speak, that the location holds doesn't really stop with the burial aspect from the natives. And it sort of picks up once again as we get into the colonial era. Back in 1775, a family of settlers known as the Clay's family, in which they had a father patriarch, God goodness. The patriarchal figure was Mitchell Clay and his wife Phoebe Belcher, and they had 3 children at the time of coming over, and that was Bartley, Tabitha, and Ezekiel. The family moved into the region and sort of just set up shop on top of the burial ground. They gave no care in the world to the fact that, hey, this is a sacred location to the local Shawnee people. They just sort of plopped down and put up a little settlement. And this didn't really bode well with the local tribe. So again, this angered the tribe, who repeatedly warned the Clay family to remove themselves from the location. So what comes later was not just sudden and unfair. Like, they were given credible and fair warning several times by the tribe, asking them to leave and asking them to remove themselves from their sacred land. But the Clay family didn't care. They just stayed. And within August of 1783, it sort of hit a boiling point. So a group of tribesmen eventually got fed up with the matter and decided to handle it themselves. So while Mitchell, the father of the family, was out and was away from the homestead and away from his family, this group of Shawnee natives took vengeance into their own hands by targeting the Clay children. They quickly killed the youngest son, Bartley, while he was out working the fields. I believe he was chased down, but I could be wrong. And they proceeded to scalp his body after death. Tabitha was next, and she was stabbed to death by the group, and I know for a fact that she was chased. And the worst was for the eldest son, Ezekiel, who was not killed right away. He was actually chased out of the home and was captured. He was then brought out from away from the homestead and was later burned alive at the stake. So obviously this is horrible, but then, the dad has to come home eventually, and he does, and Mitchell returns home to find out of the fate of his children, and now he has taken a vow of vengeance against the Shawnee people. It is just back and forth blood. And so Mitchell gathers a bunch of settlers and went around pretty much slaughtering as many Shawnee tribesmen as he could find with this group of people. And the entire massacre of this location would pretty much just stain the land. And for a very, very long time, settlers pretty much refused to go anywhere near this location. They didn't want anything to do with it. They did not want to set up shop. They didn't want to be anywhere in relation to this dark history. That was until 1926, when an entrepreneur by the name of Conley T. Snido came along, and he eventually purchased all the land that had once was claimed by the Clays and, was the burial ground. People aren't really 100% sure, though, if Snido knows about the massacre at the time of purchasing the land. Regardless, though, his plan was to create an amusement park, the same amusement park that stands today. And his goal, essentially, for doing this endeavor and doing this commitment was to target the vastly growing coal mining industry and the flocks of families of these workers that were moving into the region. So he wanted to capitalize on that sort of market that really the location didn't have anyone to compete with. And it started out pretty small. It was, pretty rudimentary for when it comes to attractions for an amusement park. They started off with a Ferris wheel and one of those rotating swing set type rides, as well as a swimming pool. So pretty top of the line entertainment. Although, again, this takes place like a few years just before the Depression, so I'm sure this sort of entertainment is like crazy insane for the people at the time. I'm sure it's not just seen as like these are kid rides. I'm sure everyone's having fun. However, by the time the 1950s rolled in, this is after the Depression now, things sort of moved towards the more traditional set of rides and attractions. You got some, small roller coasters being built up. You've got some more little booths and guest areas and locations to buy stuff. And they put in a little pond. I don't know why. I don't know if that was even there. They're near a lake, so I don't know why they need a pond. They already had a pool, so I honestly don't know why that's added in, but it is, and apparently is a thing that you need to know for the later half. However, this whole, merriness that the amusement park is bringing, it doesn't really last that long, and the dark, bloody history of the location seems to trudge itself back up, and another chain of horrific events, plagues the park. So within the same years, this being the 1950s, the park would suffer its very first casualty, that being a young girl who was tragically killed by a truck. Now, it's very odd how she died because she wasn't hit by the truck, but she was actually riding the swing set ride, the one that I believe it's similar to the ones that we've had today, in which you sit down in a swing and the ride spins you around and rotates you really fast. However, the ones we have today lift you up and they bring you into the air so that you don't collide with anything. So, unfortunately for this young girl, the truck backed up into the path while she was riding the ride, and she went full force into the side of the truck and died. Several years later, in 1966, a 11-year-old boy would drown in the pond that we mentioned earlier that is located on the park. He drowned after getting his arm caught onto one of the drainage pipes that ran, through it. I don't know why he was in the pond to begin with, but he just was, apparently. And worst of all, which is pretty sad for this story, he was actually considered missing at the time. So his family thought he ran off or he got lost in the park. They didn't discover his body until about a week later. Yeah, it's bad. They didn't discover his body for several days, eventually noticing that he was in the water. So that's when they found out. There are technically other deaths related to the park, those two being the most highly profiled cases, being that of children and being very gruesome in the way that it happened. But there are others. A man has been said to have jumped off the top of the Ferris wheel while riding it. And according to the current owner of the park, there are approximately 6 additional deaths that took place on the grounds while it was operating as an amusement park. I can't find super detailed information on that matter, so just bear with me. That's why I'm saying apparently or approximately, because I don't know. I don't know those ones for fact. So At minimum, there's 2. At maximum, there are 9. I think I did that math right? Yes. So there's a minimum 2, maximum 9 deaths related to the amusement park aspect of this location, and the whole massacre that took place with the Clays family and the Shawnee tribe, and then in addition to that, the 3,000 bodies that apparently are buried underneath the location. So if you want to put this into context, that's what we're at the moment. And however, the drowning of this child in the lake was essentially the last straw for the location, and the Shawnee Lake Amusement Park, as it came to be known, was promptly shut down again in 1966, the year the boy drowned. This was up until 1985, when the park would remain pretty much abandoned up until this point, until a man by the name of, and I kid you not, Gaylord White. I know people have this name, it's just funny. But Gaylord White now owns the location. He purchased the entire land, just as Snido did before him. However, this time, as he tried to revive the park, it didn't last. People knew too much about the history that it had, with the amusement park. They knew about the deaths. It was more publicized. And the revival only lasted approximately 3 years. And again, it was promptly shut down at that point. The location overall was later converted into a fishing lake and campground area. However, the ruins of the park remain to this day, and unsurprisingly, stories and legends of spirits and ghosts have begun to plague the park. Because obviously, you're going to have a rundown, decrepit, abandoned amusement park in the middle of the woods near a lake, and you don't expect people to think crazy stuff's going on. So that's the whole context. That's the whole backstory for this location. And so yeah, let's get into the ghosts. But real quick, I'm going to run a quick little break right now. If you're listening to this on Anchor and other podcast platforms, you'll hear it. On YouTube, I don't know if it'll come through or not, but I'll be right back, and we will talk about the ghosts, because there are a few, and they're pretty rough. Out of all the places I've researched into so far and talked about on the podcast, these ghosts are up there in the top 5 of this is a rough place. I don't know if I want to go visit. So yeah, I'll be right back.